IVN's founder and chairman, Eric Benhamou, has always been a visionary. In 1981, he co-founded Bridge Communications and was the vice president of engineering until its merge with 3Com in 1987. From 1990 to 2000, Eric served as the CEO of 3Com and during the early parts of the 21st century as chairman and CEO of Palm. Today, Eric is the CEO of Benhamou Global Ventures and continues to play an active role in innovative, high-tech firms throughout the world. In addition to his many business accomplishments, Eric is an adjunct professor in INSEAD and also a visiting professor at Ben Gurion University. In 2003, he was appointed to the Joint High-Level Advisory Panel of the U.S.-Israeli Science and Technology Commission. And on a personal level, Eric is an inspiration to me, and I'm proud and honored to have had the opportunity to work so closely with him. Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, Jeff, for this very kind introduction, Daphne, and good morning, everybody. Is the sound working okay? Yeah? Okay. I want to start by welcoming you all and thanking our many sponsors. I'm very grateful that you would take half a day from your schedule, even the day of strike, and spend it with us. I also want to thank Daphne and the entire IVN team for putting up such a wonderful event. The agenda says that this is about my personal philanthropic journey, and I want to make sure that you don't misunderstand me. This is not a model. This is just what I went through to develop my own philanthropic instincts and strategies. And you will see that it has fits and starts. It doesn't go in a straight line. I learned a few things, made a few mistakes, and eventually found something that seems right for me. And the reason I chose to share that with you is because philanthropists must learn from each other. I hope you can learn a few things from me, and I look forward to learning a few more things from you for the rest of the day. A way to get us started is with a quote that I found inspirational years ago. We make a living by what we get, we make a life by what we give. These words were written by Winston Churchill, probably one of the most prominent statesmen in the 20th century. The notion of giving back to society, as opposed to just giving back to people, is not that old. It's probably 200 years old at the most. But it started to become an important part of people's upbringing and notions about society, basically last century. And this was true in the broad Western culture. It was true in many other civilizations. And obviously, if you go to our own Jewish tradition, this notion of Gemilut Hasidim is present. And we know from an early age, and this goes back more than 2,000 years ago, that for society to go around, you've got to have laws, you've got to have people that create and work, and then you've got to have some other thing. And it could be philanthropy, social involvement, but you've got to have some other thing because the world with simply laws and work doesn't go around very well. And it's this other thing that I want to talk to you about today. And everyone takes a personal view of it. There are no two philanthropists that do exactly the same things, that are moved by exactly the same things. So we're influenced by our upbringing, our personal values, our education system, and where we come from. So let me tell you a bit where I come from. I was born to a Sephardic Jewish family about 56 years ago, and my city of birth is Tlemcen. You can't really see it on this map, but it's the northmost, westernmost city on the border between Algeria and Morocco. So this is where I come from. My family had probably been there for about 600 years or close to that. But I really grew up not so much there, but in France. Like most Jews from Algeria, we actually moved to France in the early 60s. And this is where my formative years took place. And France is a great country of asylum for Jewish people, at least it was at the time, not so much today. I learned there that you have a very powerful central government that creates a welfare society and that dispenses largesse and social benefits. And yet, despite that, you have continuous protest. National protest is like a sport. Every Sunday, you have a choice of either watching soccer or going to a demonstration. And so, to me, this was kind of a way of life. This is not exactly the perfect place to learn about philanthropy. Philanthropy doesn't exist, at least not to the scale of the wealth of the country. The other thing that I learned is more of a rational thinking. This old man to the right of the slide is Descartes. You heard about Cartesian. It comes from this man who said, "I think, therefore I am." That's his most famous quote. Basically, what it means is that in Western Europe, you learn about the power of logic, science, technology, and building on rational thinking. These are things which I learned and I inherited from the French culture. But to be honest, I didn't spend more than 15 years in France. Most of my life I've actually spent in another place called Silicon Valley, and I've become American for the past 35 years or so. And Silicon Valley is a unique place. Very, very often imitated, never quite perfectly got it. But this is really a unique place where ideas converge and creativity happens. It's not by magic. It's a very careful mix of the right immigration policies, the right universities, the right climate, the right environment, and really great things happen there, and this is why I continue to live there. This experience of the last 30 years, which basically enabled me to have a career in the high technology industry, has shaped the values that I have today. And I don't suspect they will change very much for the rest of my life. You kind of develop these things in early adulthood, and then you try to stick to it and design your life to be within that framework. And my values start with a strong feeling of a Jewish identity and a deep connection to Israel. Perhaps it comes from the fact that early on in my life, I had to leave the place of my birth and find another place which I never quite find home there. So I realized I needed to have a connection to my roots. So Israel to me and Tzionut was kind of a normal thing for me to grow up with. The other thing which I've come to really admire and hold very high in my value system is entrepreneurship. I have kind of a simplistic view of life. Either you create or you take. And people who create tend to be entrepreneurs. The others, they are there to have a piece of it being redistributed to them. But the people who really make the world go round are the entrepreneurs. It's kind of a very selfish, narrow view of things. But every single experience in my life has proven this correct, at least for me. So entrepreneurship is something very high. I'm not just referring to high-tech entrepreneurship. I'm talking about entrepreneurship in social ventures, even entrepreneurship in government, believe it or not. It's sometimes incompatible, but you can actually change governments through entrepreneurship thinking. I do believe that most sources of wealth creation start with science and technology advancement, and I hold this also very, very high. I also believe strongly in meritocracy. Meritocracy means that basically you're not rewarded for efforts, but for results. And you don't have an egalitarian treatment. You have, at the most, an attempt to create egalitarian opportunities, but to ensure that the people who deserve the most get the most. And I believe that meritocracy is what causes people to stretch and reach new heights in their field, whether it is a social field, a professional field, or artistic field, or whatever. So this is something that I also believe strongly, and also believe that I believe in the individual as opposed to the power of the government. And again, this perhaps may be a reaction to the 15 years I spent in France, where I felt that everything was taking place in Paris, top down, and that the differences between individuals were not well acknowledged and respected. So these are the things which I hold dear. And I take these values with me when I go to a boardroom of a high-tech company, big, medium, or small, or a boardroom of IVN, or to my family. This is this is my personal makeup, basically. When it comes to my philanthropic journey, I have to admit that I barely knew how to spell philanthropy for the first part of my life. In fact, to me, giving was nothing more than putting money in a tzedakah box for the first 20 years. And I didn't really imagine that philanthropy was anything connected to me personally up until much, much later. In fact, what I call phase one of my philanthropic journey is when I stopped having a negative net worth and when I started to have enough financial independence that I could start to worry about my obligations to other people or what I should do with the wealth I didn't need to spend for my basic needs. So financial independence is something which is an enabler to become a philanthropist. It's not the only enabler, but it's important. I always like to give this analogy. When you're in an airplane, one of the first things that you're told is, in case of cabin depressurization, oxygen mask will come down. First, put the mask around your face, and then you worry about other people. In life, it means you've got to first get your oxygen influx, take care of yourself, and once you can breathe, then you can allow other people to get the benefit of your help. So to me, this was a transition into phase one. And inevitably, the first thing you worry about is you make sure that your loved ones, your relatives, your children, of course, are taken care of. That's the first view of philanthropy. And of course, to the extent you go beyond that, you tend to do this based on emotions, and you do what I would call tactical giving. Based on what feels good at the moment, people that seem to you deserve to get your help. But without really strong analytical thinking, purely emotions. I believe most people go through that phase. In some cases, people get stuck in that phase. In other cases, you just go through this and then you try to find something a little better, more effective. And what happened to me is that as I moved to phase two, I realized that I needed to do something a little more strategic, more effective. I couldn't be so tactical in my philanthropy, while at the same time trying to teach strategy to my business colleagues. So there was this kind of a dichotomy in my mind. So I had to think coherently both in the world of philanthropy and the world of business. So my first attempt was to focus on my local community. And I include Israel as part of this because I've always come here often. But my local community is basically a place where I can see and touch people. I can see the effect of what I do. I can get feedback. This is not something abstract. I can see the impact I have on the ground on a day-to-day basis. So I focused on uncontroversial things: schools, universities, hospitals. Who could be against these things? And then I resorted to what I would call traditional philanthropy for the rest. I paid my dues. I was a good dues-giving member of the local Jewish Federation. And I gave to local charities who I felt were part of the environment where I lived. And this helped me connect my past to me and open up a future for another generation, helping kids go to school, having access to higher education, it made sense to me. I'm a product of higher education, and I could never have had the life I had without having a good education, both primary, secondary, and universities. So I figured this is something which should be available to other people. So I focused a lot of my energy and financial giving to these sort of causes. And this was satisfying, at least much better than tactical giving. I felt it was having an impact, but I lacked a bit of focus. So I moved to phase 3. And phase 3 was driven to me by both an opportunity and a threat. The threat came to me when I realized how increasingly isolated Israel had become. This was around the year 2000. Remember the time of the Second Intifada, and how Israel was treated, particularly in the US media, in Western media in general. And the carefully orchestrated campaign of defamation against anything Israel did. And I realized that this country as a whole needs some help, more help than others. And if Jewish people in the diaspora don't help Israel, who will? The opportunity came to me when I realized that in the 90s, something wonderful happened to the state of Israel, which is the emergence and the growth of the high-tech industry. Not only did this become a source of wealth because of the businesses that were created and the employments that came along with that, but also it created something else which does not appear on Israel's balance sheet. And I'm referring to the fact that a new generation of leaders emerged as part of this high-tech industry. Leaders who were trained by virtue of their work on how to solve complex business problems with lots of variables, how to deal with ambiguity, how to think on a global basis, how to be extremely dispassionate about problem solving, how to think strategically, how to deal with people who are extremely heterogeneous in their background, how to lead. All of these skills are skills you must master if you're to succeed in the high-tech business. And this whole generation of people were very much like me. I happened to spend most of my career in the States, in Silicon Valley. Many of them happened to spend that same time here in Israel, but really very much alike in our thinking, in our approach to the world. And that to me was the opportunity. So there was a threat, there was an opportunity. And I decided to focus most of my philanthropic activities around Israel and try to tap this incredible know-how that had emerged, mostly through the business world. These are some of the organizations that I started to get very involved with, and I'll tell you more about them. Israel 21C is an organization that has started with several friends in Silicon Valley. Our purpose was to basically create an image of Israel in the minds of the media at first and the broad public second. An image of Israel that would be different than simply Israel in the conflict. Whenever Israel comes up in the media, it used to be less so today, but it used to be then, it was always in the context of the conflict. And all the contribution that Israel made to the world of science, culture, art, medicine, none of this would ever come up. It never made the front page, not even the back page, not even page 17. It was not interesting. It was not known. It was not acknowledged by the media. So we dedicated Israel 21C to that theme, Israel beyond the conflict. The rich society and contributions made by Israel are now at least reported on. In the last decade, we published over 10,000 stories in mainstream media. And we know that this is a long-term effort. You cannot undo decades of negative PR with just one fledgling little startup, nonprofit. But you do this one story at a time, long term, and eventually you start to move the needle. I realized that as much as my phase one was tactical, if I really wanted to have long-term impact, I had to think strategically much, much longer term. I had to resist the urge to feel good in the short term. I had to think about a long-term destination and I had to get there systematically one step at a time and be very patient and understand that there would be a few steps taken back. For every 3 steps taken forward, you take 1 or 2 back. So Israel 21C was an example of that. I believe it is making extremely good progress, although you can't measure it one day at a time. But if you have enough good metrics, you get a sense of whether you're tracking progress or not. I started to get more involved with the university environment in this country because universities created the talents that created the high-tech industry. So if you want to have more of this, you've got to have more good universities, and the existing ones have to become stronger and stronger. I decided to get more involved with Ben Gurion for various circumstances, not the least of which is that Avishai Braverman is a very persuasive man. But in addition to this, I felt that there was more entrepreneurship alive there than perhaps in other places. I realized we're on the Tel Aviv campus, but nevertheless, I felt attracted to that. And I felt like I could make a contribution helping to grow the notion of entrepreneurship, high-tech education there. And I became quite involved there. And to this day, I continue to serve on its board. I became involved in an organization called iSafe, which is Israel's Scientific Research Alternative Energy Fund. It's a little complicated name, but basically it focuses on the following issue. If you think about how an industry like the high-tech industry happens, it starts with fundamental research that takes place in research labs and universities. That research is extremely risky. It is long-term, it is fundamental. No one is going to fund this in the private sector. Funding has to come from other sources, namely government or the nonprofit sector. If you don't have this feeder research upstream, you're not going to have anything that the venture capital industry can invest in. Venture capital can help deploy capital to young, innovative companies whose ideas rest on the shoulders of the researchers that have preceded that work in universities. When you have a vacuum of funding in fundamental research, you should expect that a few years later, maybe a couple of decades later, you'll have a drop in the actual commercial innovation in that field. You've had a scarcity of long-term research funding in Israel for the last decade now. I think all of you who are close to university environments understand that. So iSafe basically focuses on partially filling back that vacuum, particularly in the field of alternative energies. So that's what we do. Felt to me this was extremely strategic, long-term. It could leverage lots of good outcomes downstream, and obviously a research that I helped to fund today may or may not lead any results 2 or 3 years downstream, and even if it leads results, it may or may not advance that field from a commercial standpoint downstream. Nevertheless, you only succeed if you try, and if you try enough times. That's the whole nature of research. So I got involved with that. Obviously, IVN became a very important part of my life back 10 years ago alongside with many friends and colleagues, many of them in this room. We came together and realized that we had common values, common concerns, common goals, and we should create a platform to do this together. So IVN became basically that platform. a non-profit organization that would focus on venture philanthropy, which is basically a business approach to social problem solving. And our focus would be bridging or closing social gaps and generating systemic change in Israeli society. We used to call ourselves a venture philanthropy organization. Today we call ourselves a social investment organization. Subtle difference. Venture philanthropy refers to the input. The input is a business approach. Social investment carries with it the notion of a return. If you invest, you want a return. So a social investment organization basically will place emphasis on generating tangible returns and sustainability in all the things it does. So this is that evolution in the course of a decade through trial and errors, which is perhaps a biggest contribution of today's conference. We focus on social change, both in the geographic and the social periphery. We do carry this entrepreneurship approach to everything we do. We help fund, grow, expand, and reach the critical mass of various social ventures. We tap the power of our network, which is our members, our extended membership group. We leverage the collaboration of the tri-sectors, which Daphne talked about. And once again, we think not short-term, but long-term. On your tables, there's a booklet, which is a portfolio of ventures which we've funded over the past decade, and that funding is accelerating. And some of the early investments we made are starting to produce very tangible returns, many of which have started to reach sustainability, which is a very gratifying result for us. It didn't happen in a straight line. This is basically the history of the last decade for IVN. When we initially started, we focused on the world of education that seemed badly broken to us, and we spent a lot of time and resources in municipal interventions in a variety of cities around the country. And while this did help at the moment, it did not create all the long-term impact that we had wanted, and we realized it was very capital intensive. And while it was good, it was not necessarily the best direction for us longer term. It did help us create one lasting legacy, which I think is one of our proudest accomplishments, the Institute for School Leadership, Abnei Rosha, which basically came out of all the learning of various municipal interventions in various schools, in various cities, understanding that if there's one thing that you can do to help improve a school, and one thing only, it would be to make the principal of that school more effective. Not just a super teacher, but someone who understands how to manage all the resources of a school, and not just the school, but outreach into the broader community to achieve measurable results. If we could create that skill transfer, it would really uplift that school as a whole. And ISL was designed to accomplish that overall mission. And today ISL is in operation, and it trains and becomes a resource to the principals of the 3,000 or 3,500 public schools in this country. So again, one mistake or one imperfect accomplishment leads to something better. You fall back, you learn, you readjust, and you set your sights higher. We started social entrepreneurship maybe 6-7 years ago. The portfolio that I mentioned before started off as a bunch of social entrepreneurs that we funded. And we realized that it's not enough to just start. You also have to take organizations that are midstream and help scale them up. And social ventures, a social venture initiative, which is 18 months old now, is the outgrowth of that. So you see, once again, you see a start, a readjustment, course correction, and you move on to something bigger and better. So this is basically how we went from this venture philanthropic approach to the social investment, social venture approach that we're at today. What are the rationale, the key components which make up a social venture? Well, there are 5 things which are coming together. The first is there is a social need which is not met. It is not met by the private sector, by the logical market forces. It is not effectively addressed by governments. It is there unmet. So that it basically, the market works only so far, and government's efficiency are limited. There are gaping holes in between, and these holes are where social ventures can grow. The other component that justifies the rationale for social ventures is the opportunity to substantially reduce or in fact avoid social costs, the cost that society would bear as a whole in the absence of the venture. The other key component is that if you're able to address the needs of a disenfranchised population and bring them back in the mainstream of society, you also give them legitimacy, you give them a role, and you build up their self-esteem, and then they become productive again. That's another component of the social venture rationale. Next is this notion of capital efficiency. We live in a world of scarcity of capital. So the capital we have, we've got to make it work as efficiently, as productively as possible. The social venture should give you higher capital efficiency than the private sector or than governments. And the final and perhaps most essential component is that there is a potential for sustainability if the social venture has a market-tested business components in its activities. These are the things which we look for in our social ventures. Not all of them will succeed. We hope to have a good success rate, but we're prepared to deal with failures. And as I suggested before, every failure is not really a failure if you learn. If you can pull yourself together and start something a little better directed. So in all these years of trial and errors, what have I learned? What are the lessons which perhaps could be useful to you, which I've learned for myself? First lesson, unless you really have a lot of capital, unless you're a billionaire, there's really no point in starting your own foundation. You mean good, and you'd like to have your name somewhere just to feel better about yourself, but you don't really have to start a new foundation. The world of non-profits, in Israel in particular, is extremely scattered. I would say 80–90% of non-profits are below critical mass and fundamentally ineffective. So for people who are new to the philanthropic journey, you should try to resist this urge, unless you're Bill Gates. There are relatively few of us who fit that description. The other piece of it is that there's great value in having a network. When I look around this room, there's an immense power in this network of people who are basically like-minded but have enough differences that they can learn from each other. So that's my first overall lesson. Don't make the landscape more scattered. Clearly, there's some holes, there's some things unaddressed where it's justified to start something new. But in most cases, if you want to start something, just like in business, do a competitive analysis. It could be that what you want to do is already covered by 25 amutot. And perhaps a smarter thing would be, well, let's see who is really doing a good job there, and let me try and partner with these people. Number two is kind of the corollary. There's a lot of good causes. There's a lot of things that are moving, that move your heart, your emotions. You have a scarcity of time and resources, so you've got to prioritize. You cannot do everything. You've got to have focus. Just like in business, you've got to have focus. And the other thing which I want to break to you is that not everything matters the same. There are some things which are nice to do, things which are very important to do, and things that are absolutely essential to do. And you've got to do a forced ranking in your mind of what you really care about. And your list may not be exactly the same as the list of the person sitting next to you. Completely fine. But you've got to get clarity on this. Number three, This picture basically, it was illustrate the point I want to make. I took this picture about, 8 weeks ago on Rothschild Boulevard. This is at the time of the protest. The protests were a very interesting illustration of a failure mode, where you have an economic system with, on the surface, a fast-growing economy, on the surface, a government of laws, and yet all kinds of social problems brewing, which suggested that really the market is efficient only so far, government is efficient only so far, and you have a lot of space there where we don't really have good systems to address the problems that emerge. And the other lesson corollary to that is that if you really want to address these hard, intractable problems, you cannot do this in a brute force way. You cannot do this using old methods. You've got to do this using a lot of creativity, a lot of innovation, and entrepreneurship approach. Number 4. Most of us come from the world of business. Most of you in the room are business leaders, even at least you were business leaders in the past. And in the world of business, you cannot get away without strict discipline, transparent measurement and evaluation of what you do. It could be as simple as clean financial statements, but usually it goes much beyond that. Well, measurement and evaluation is an absolutely critical component of anything you've got to do in the social world. It is harder, much, much harder. I wish there were sharper edges. I wish there were better standards. But just because it's hard does not mean it's impossible. In fact, I keep pressing my colleagues at IVN, let's be at the forefront of this. This is something which can really give us a lot of leverage on how we measure progress, how we improve the allocation of our capital, whether it's financial or intellectual capital. We've got to have better measurement and evaluation systems. And my final lesson is that in business, oftentimes, you want to start something, you don't really know how to exit, but you figure out ways to exit when your contribution has stopped being effective. In the world of nonprofits, it's very important also to think about how to exit. When I think about the world of exit, I don't mean stop. It means reaching a point where you no longer have to push and the effort is self-sustainable. So when you start something in the world of nonprofits, sustainability is harder than in the world of business. In the world of business, you know that when you become cash flow positive, when you generate enough cash to feed yourself, feed your growth, you're okay. You can sustain yourself. Provided you have a good strategic plan, you can keep living, making a contribution. In the world of nonprofits, very, very difficult. Except if you think about sustainability as an integral part of your venture. So these are 5 takeaways that I thought were useful to me and might be useful to you as well. I know that they overlap with a lot of the topics from the roundtables, and so I've shared my views and my biases. I hope they've been useful to you. In closing, my belief is that much like business, philanthropy must be a passion, but also much like business, philanthropy requires discipline, analysis, goals, very patient capital, and a lot of collaboration and teamwork. Thanks very much.